Welcome to Midnight Confessions, where every whisper hides a secret and every shadow has teeth. What you're about to hear will twist your soul, blur reality, and keep you awake long after the screen goes dark. Dare to listen, but don't say I didn't warn you. Story 1. I uncovered an ancient priest's journal from 1910, and what I read inside has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about evil. Working in property cleanup, you encounter strange things daily, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the malevolent forces I encountered at the abandoned Morrison estate. The nightmare began when elderly Mrs. Morrison passed away, leaving behind her isolated Victorian mansion deep in the forest where sunlight never quite reaches the ground. Her descendants hired my cleaning service to prepare the property for sale, not knowing they were about to unleash something that should have remained buried forever. This wasn't just any old house. It was a monument to darkness. The moment I crossed the threshold, every cell in my body screamed danger. The air itself felt contaminated, thick with decades of decay and something far more sinister. Each footstep on the rotting floorboards sent echoes through empty chambers, creating a symphony of dread that made my skin crawl. Working alone in that tomb-like atmosphere, I discovered something hidden beneath loose floorboards in the master bedroom. A leather-bound diary so ancient it seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The journal belonged to Father Benedict, dated July 12, 1910. His elegant handwriting told a story that defied belief, yet every instinct told me it was horrifyingly real. Sanctus Deus. I document these unholy events for those who come after, though I pray no soul will ever witness such abominations again. The village of St. Margaret has fallen to darkness beyond comprehension. The temperature plummeted as I read further. Father Benedict described children whose innocent laughter transformed into blood-curdling screams, their eyes becoming bottomless voids of pure evil. One by one, they succumbed to an ancient curse, speaking in demonic tongues while their bodies contorted in impossible ways. This was no earthly sickness, the priest wrote. This was Satan himself walking among us, claiming innocent souls for his infernal army. My hands trembled as I discovered Father Benedict's account of the first exorcism attempt. The possessed child didn't just resist, she mocked God himself, laughing with voices that belonged to the damned. When she died, her body twisted into positions that violated every law of nature, her mouth frozen in a silent scream that seemed to echo through time itself. The diary revealed how this demonic entity spread like a plague, jumping from host to host, consuming the entire village. Father Benedict's Latin prayers scattered throughout the text showed his desperate attempts to maintain faith while confronting pure evil. The last entry, dated October 31st, 1910, was written in barely legible script. The village is extinct. Every man, woman, and child has been claimed by this ancient evil. It whispers my name in the darkness, calling me to join its legion of the damned. Tonight, I make my final stand. If these words survive, know that I fought until my last breath, though I fear the darkness has already won. The moment I finished reading, the house itself seemed to respond. The wind outside became a howling banshee, and something heavy began moving through the corridors above me. My breath came in ragged gasps as whispers filled the air. The same demonic Latin Father Benedict had transcribed. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dying light, stood a figure that violated every law of nature. Its flesh was translucent and stretched impossibly tight over jutting bones. Its eyes were empty voids that seemed to contain all the suffering of the damned. When it smiled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth blackened with ancient blood, I knew I was staring into the face of the same demon that had consumed an entire village over a century ago. It spoke in Father Benedict's voice. "I've been waiting for you." I ran, faster than humanly possible, through twisting hallways that seemed to stretch into infinity, past walls that bled shadow, until I burst through the front door and into my car. In the rearview mirror, every window of that cursed house glowed with malevolent light, watching me escape. I never returned. I abandoned my career, moved across the country, and tried to forget. But some horrors follow you forever. The whispers still come at night. Ancient words that make my soul recoil in terror. And right now, as I share this story with you, I feel that familiar presence in the corner of my room. Smiling that impossible smile, it's still waiting. Story 2. Marcus wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close as we watched movers transform our dream house into reality. Our furniture, which had seemed overwhelming in our cramped city apartment, now looked like children's toys in this sprawling suburban palace. The neighborhood was picture perfect. Every house an identical cream-colored fortress of middle-class ambition. It was exactly what we'd dreamed of during our courtship. The kind of place where we'd eventually raise our own family. Feels empty with just the two of us, I whispered against his shoulder. Not for long, he murmured back, and I could feel his smile. We'd never explicitly discussed children, but the understanding hung between us like a promise. He wanted them soon. I preferred to wait. It was an unspoken negotiation that felt comfortable, natural. What we didn't know was that we'd moved into something far more sinister than a simple neighborhood. We'd entered a breeding ground for unspeakable horror as I gazed across the pristine suburban landscape. A bone-deep chill crawled up my spine. Most cookie-cutter developments made my skin crawl. Those soulless manufactured communities that felt more like movie sets than actual places where people lived and breathed. But this place was different in ways that made my stomach twist with dread. The houses stood like silent sentinels, each one identical, yet somehow harboring its own dark secrets. To our left, an empty shell of a home displayed a garishly bright, "For Sale" sign that seemed to mock us with its cheerful colors. But the house to our right, that's where the real horror began. This wasn't just lively. It was disturbingly, unnaturally animated. Sickeningly pink flowers drooped from windowsills like bleeding wounds, their petals scattered across the yard like drops of blood. Children's toys lay strewn about in patterns too perfect to be random, too organized to be real. Even now, in the dying light, two children moved like puppets on strings. A boy of perhaps 12 mechanically pushing a smaller girl on a rusted yellow swing. Their laughter rang hollow, echoing off the empty houses like the cries of the damned. "Well, hello there." The voice cut through the evening air like a blade, and I spun around to face our approaching doom. A woman glided toward us with a smile so wide it looked surgically attached to her face. She was beautiful in that plastic, unnatural way that made your eyes water to look at her directly. Golden hair pulled back so tightly it stretched her skin, clothes that fit like they were painted on, and a belly swollen with something that might have been life. I found myself backing away, arms crossed defensively over my chest as primal fear flooded my system. "Hello," James managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I could feel his terror radiating off him in waves. The creature, because that's what she was. I was sure of it now, clutched a foil-wrapped dish that steamed ominously in the cooling air. "You must be our new neighbors," she chirped, her voice like nails on a chalkboard disguised as wind chimes. "I just knew it the moment I saw you." "Yes," I whispered, my throat suddenly dry as bone. "I'm Adeline. This is James. We're thrilled to be here." The lies tasted like copper in my mouth. Oh, how absolutely perfect. Her smile stretched impossibly wider, revealing teeth too white, too sharp. My family and I were positively dying to meet a young couple. This really is the most wonderful place to create new life, don't you think? Her eyes gleamed as they fixed on us with predatory intensity. We don't have children," I stammered, the words falling from my lips like stones into a bottomless well. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Something ancient and hungry flickered behind those two bright eyes before the smile snapped back into place like a bear trap closing. "Oh." The single word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken threats. "Well, here's some tuna casserole." She thrust the dish toward us, and James took it with trembling hands. When he lifted the foil, the smell that escaped made my stomach lurch. Not the scent of food, but something rotten, something wrong. "We never caught your name," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her lips moved silently, like a broken doll's mechanism grinding uselessly. The silence stretched on until I thought I might scream, "Honey!" The voice that shattered the quiet wasn't human. It was too loud, too deep, like it was being broadcast from speakers hidden in the walls. The woman's head snapped toward the sound with an audible crack. "I must go," she said, her hands caressing her swollen belly in a way that made my skin crawl. "We will be seeing each other again, very soon." Before we could respond, she was gliding away with movements too fluid to be natural. As she reached the porch, I caught sight of movement in the upstairs window. Two pale faces peered down at us through baby blue curtains. Twin girls with hollow, empty eyes. One raised a skeletal hand in a wave that looked more like a warning. The other just stared with the kind of hunger that belonged in nightmares. We should have thrown that casserole away. God, why didn't we throw it away? Those first few days blurred together in a haze of unpacking and settling in. But that dish sat in our freezer like a ticking time bomb. Every time I opened the freezer door, it seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "It'll be nice to eat something that isn't takeout," James said, slumping at our kitchen table like a man defeated. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his hands shook as he ran them through his unwashed hair. "Yeah," I replied, though the word felt like ash in my mouth. "I just hope 2-day-old tuna won't kill us." The joke fell flat, hanging in the air like a curse. When I nudged him with my hip, trying to recapture some normalcy, he pulled me onto his lap with desperate hunger. His arms wrapped around me like chains, and I realized this was the first time since moving here that we touched without fear creeping in. Something was changing us, poisoning us from the inside. His mouth found my collarbone, trailing kisses up my neck that felt more like branded marks than affection. I tangled my fingers in his greasy hair, trying to remember when he'd last showered, when either of us had last felt human. "I was waiting for you, my love," he whispered against my skin, but his voice sounded hollow, like an echo of the man I'd married. The oven's ding shattered the moment like breaking glass. As I reached for the casserole dish, my blood turned to ice. There, drifting through our window like smoke, came a sound that made every primitive instinct in my body scream in terror. I froze, my hands suspended inches from the dish, as that ungodly noise filled our kitchen. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. James was absorbed in fidgeting with a loose chair leg, his movements becoming more frantic. "What do you mean?" But I could see the fear creeping into his eyes. Before I could convince myself I'd imagined it, the sound came again. A shriek that belonged to no earthly creature. It was the sound of something being torn apart, something dying in agony. My eyes locked onto the neighbor's house, where warm yellow light spilled from windows like bleeding wounds. Another scream split the night, clearer this time, unmistakably human. Then came a crash that shook our walls. What the hell was that? James jumped to his feet, his face pale as moonlight. Shadows moved behind the neighbor's curtains, shapes too twisted to be human, too coordinated to be random. Then the curtains snapped shut like closing eyes. "Should I go check?" James asked, but I could see his whole body trembling. My brave husband, reduced to a terrified child by whatever lived next door. "I'll go." The words left my mouth before my brain could stop them. I grabbed an oven mitt and threw it at him. "Put in the casserole. I'll be right back." The night air hit me like a physical weight, thick and oppressive as syrup. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the street itself was hollow beneath my feet. Another scream tore through the darkness, and I nearly turned back. Nearly. "What the hell?" I muttered, as much to hear a human voice as to express my terror. My knuckles rapped against their front door 3 times, each knock sounding like a death knell. Even their porch was wrong. Too clean, too perfect, with toys arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. The door cracked open, revealing a slice of nightmare. His face was a mask of normalcy stretched over something fundamentally wrong. Square jaw, stubble, human features arranged in a way that should have been comforting, but instead made my soul recoil. "Good evening, Adeline." My name in his mouth sounded like a death sentence. "Hi," I whispered, my voice failing me. I thought I heard, "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, and in that pause I glimpsed something that made my bladder nearly release. His smile, when it came, was carved rather than felt. The door opened wider, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. His white shirt was soaked in blood. Not spots or stains, but drenched as if he'd been bathing in it. Fresh crimson dripped from his sleeves, pooled at his feet. A small boy clung to his leg, a child I'd never seen before, with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. "Everything is perfectly fine, Hifyai," he said, his hand absently stroking the boy's hair. "My wife is simply bringing new life into the world." The casual way he said it, covered in blood and smiling that terrible smile, made reality tilt sideways. Should we call someone? An ambulance?" I stammered. "No." His voice cut like a blade. "That won't be necessary. This isn't her first time, so to speak." He chuckled, and the sound was like bones breaking. "Oh, okay. Well, congratulations then." His gaze traveled over me like cold fingers, lingering in ways that made my skin want to crawl right off my body. "Have a lovely night, Adeline. We're so pleased you moved in." As the door began to close, the boy suddenly shoved his small hand through the gap. A piece of paper fluttered to the porch like a dying moth, and the door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. I picked up the paper with trembling fingers, holding it under the porch light. The message, scrawled in what I prayed was red crayon, made my world collapse. Mommy makes lots of babies, followed by a smiley face that looked more like a skull's grin. Another scream echoed from inside the house, and I ran. The phone's shrill ring cut through my bath like a scream. Water sloshed over the edges as I stumbled naked and dripping to the kitchen, wrapping a towel around myself with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since that night. Hello? I gasped into the receiver. Hello, Adeline. That voice, that horrible, cheerful voice like broken glass wrapped in silk. How are you, dear? My face contorted into an involuntary grimace. I'm fine. How are you? How's the baby? Silence stretched between us like a spider's web. When she spoke again, confusion colored her tone, but only for a heartbeat. Oh, the baby's wonderful. Such a miracle, don't you think? Yes, I whispered. Such a miracle. Listen, darling, I was hoping you and your husband would join us tonight for a little dinner party. I've made tuna casserole, your favorite. Please say yes. Please. There was something in her voice. A desperation, a hunger that made every survival instinct in my body scream warnings. Only days after labor, and she sounded more energetic than ever. More predatory. Standing in my kitchen, water still dripping from my hair, I realized we were trapped in something far worse than a strange neighborhood. We were living next door to something that wore human faces, but fed on human souls. And tonight, we were invited to dinner. I should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. The way my skin crawled whenever I saw her watching from behind those yellowed curtains. But politeness can be a death sentence, and I was raised to be nice to everyone, especially the woman next door who seemed so eager to befriend us. Of course we'll come, I heard myself saying, forcing what I hoped sounded like genuine enthusiasm into my voice. The container of store-bought cookies felt like a shield against my chest, as my husband David led me up their crumbling front steps. Something about the peeling paint around the doorframe made my stomach turn. It looked like dried skin flaking away. David knocked, then frowned at the rotting wood. This place needs serious work. Maybe we should offer to help fix. Don't, I whispered, that familiar dread creeping up my spine like ice-cold fingers. Something's wrong here. The door flew open before David could respond. There she stood, grinning with teeth too white, too perfect. Her floral dress was pristine, her apron spotless, but something about her made every nerve in my body scream run. So wonderful you're here. Everyone's been waiting! She stepped aside, gesturing us into the shadows of their home. I couldn't stop staring at her belly. Hadn't she just given birth? The massive bump looked identical to when we'd first met weeks ago. I shot a glance at David, but he seemed oblivious, smiling that trusting smile that made me fall in love with him. The dining room felt wrong, too empty, yet somehow crowded. 6 place settings for a family I'd never fully seen. A small girl sat motionless with a doll, and beside her, a sullen teenager who looked at us with hollow, knowing eyes. How could such young parents have a teenage child? But it was the man at the table that made my blood freeze. This wasn't the same person I'd met before. The husband had been dark-haired, sharp-featured. This man was blonde, soft-faced, completely different. Yet no one else seemed to notice the impossibility sitting right in front of us. I'm Marcus, he said, grinning with that same unnaturally wide smile. No need to apologize for forgetting. The wine in front of me looked black in the dim light. As I stared into its depths, memories of that first night flooded back. The crimson stains on clothing, the way shadows moved wrong in their yard. A dead fly floated to the surface, still twitching. I fished it out quickly, not wanting to seem rude, but my hands were shaking. Dinner! The woman's voice was too cheerful, too bright. She carried out a casserole that reeked of rotting fish and something else. Something metallic and wrong. Marcus grabbed his utensils like a child, clutching them in clenched fists. The teenage girl had gone completely still, and when I looked closer, I realized she wasn't breathing. The children just love this dish, the woman cooed, leaning over me to serve David. As her hair brushed my shoulder, I caught sight of her face up close. Her skin was wet, glistening, as if she was constantly sweating. Or crying. Growing boys need nutrition, David laughed nervously, the first sign he'd noticed anything amiss. A man after my own heart, Marcus roared, pounding the table so hard the glasses jumped. The sound echoed strangely, lasting too long, and I realized the children hadn't moved at all, not even a flinch. When I looked down at my plate, a long, sharp fishbone protruded from the gray mass, but it wasn't curved like a fishbone should be. It was straight, white, and looked disturbingly familiar. You simply must clean your plate, she whispered in my ear, her breath cold against my neck. You'll need to get used to eating for two soon enough. After that nightmare dinner, I tried to maintain distance. David had started his new construction job downtown, and I had interviews lined up. We were busy, I told myself. That's why we weren't socializing. But they wouldn't let us ignore them. The crying started that very night. Not one baby, a chorus of infants wailing in harmony that seemed to come from inside our own walls. We'd lie awake, clutching each other, as the sounds grew louder and more desperate with each passing hour. One afternoon, curiosity overrode my terror. Through our window, I watched a man playing with children in their backyard. He looked older, maybe 40, chasing kids around playground equipment that definitely hadn't been there before. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. "Hello," I called out, stepping onto our porch. They all turned in perfect synchronization, their smiles identical and chilling. "I'm Sarah from next door. How are you related to the family?" The man's grin widened impossibly. "Don't apologize, Sarah. I'm their son. We're all so happy you moved in." Their son, a 40-year-old son of parents who couldn't be older than 25. I ran inside and locked every door, every window. But I couldn't lock out the truth that was slowly driving me insane. A few nights later, David had reached his breaking point. The crying had become unbearable, a symphony of torment that seemed to seep through the very foundation of our house. "That's it," he muttered, pulling me close. "I'm going over there." "Don't," I pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. "Please, David, something terrible will happen." But he was already getting dressed, determined to be the reasonable neighbor. "It's probably just soundproofing issues. I'll offer to help." I watched from our bedroom window as he crossed the muddy yard in the rain, carrying our bright purple umbrella. The neighbor's house looked different in the storm, older, decaying, like it had been abandoned for decades. I pressed my face against the glass, watching as David climbed their steps and knocked on the door. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. The door opened instantly, unnaturally fast. A brilliant flash of light erupted from within, followed by the most horrific sound I'd ever heard. Not quite a gunshot, more like something wet being torn apart. David's body crumpled, his chest exploded outward in a shower of blood and tissue that painted the porch crimson. His eyes were still open, still looking up at our window as his body convulsed in its final moments. I remember screaming. I remember falling, then darkness. I woke up somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm and wet and wrong. My body was compressed, cramped, surrounded by thick red liquid and something else. Something sticky and white that clung to my skin. I was naked, unable to move, being pulled downward by an invisible force. Through the fluid around me, I heard a woman's voice, terrified, sobbing. "No, I don't want to anymore." "Please, I can't do this again!" Light exploded around me, and I gasped awake in my own bed. David sat beside me, stroking my hair, very much alive. "Just a nightmare," he soothed. But I knew better. I had seen him die. I had been somewhere else. Somewhere impossible. The next morning, she came to our door with a pie. Her belly was still swollen, still pregnant, despite the birth I'd somehow witnessed. The pie was cherry-deep red filling that looked exactly like the blood from my nightmare. "I wanted to apologize for the noise," she said sweetly, but tears were streaming down her face. "It's so difficult with newborns. You understand." "I don't have children," I said flatly, taking the pie with trembling hands. "Oh yes, of course." Her smile never wavered, even as she wept. "Not yet." She pulled me into an embrace that felt like being hugged by a corpse. Something wet and warm trickled down her legs, pooling at our feet. When I looked down, the liquid was pink and sticky. "We're just so glad you moved in," she whispered against my ear. "So very, very glad." 2 days later, I saw her fall. At 5 a.m., something compelled me to look out our bedroom window. There she stood on their roof, staring directly at me with those dead, weeping eyes. Then she stepped forward and plummeted to the ground with a sound like breaking bones. I ran outside, nearly falling down the stairs in my panic. But when I reached their yard, everything was different. The house looked ancient, abandoned. Decades of neglect had turned it into a rotting shell. The yard was overgrown with weeds that had swallowed the children's toys whole. Windows were boarded up, and the porch was piled high with garbage and debris. No one had lived here for years. The paramedics who came after my 911 call confirmed what I already knew but couldn't accept. When I asked why no other neighbors had called for help, they stared at me like I was insane. "Ma'am, no one else lives on this street." As they loaded her body into the ambulance, I could have sworn I saw her belly still moving, still growing, even in death. They tagged her as Jane Doe. No identification, no family, No history, no existence at all. We moved back to the city immediately. Our cramped apartment feels like a mansion compared to that house of horrors. I've been in therapy, trying to convince myself it was stress-induced hallucinations. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to us in that place. The worst part? David seems different now. The mole on his wrist is gone. His hair grows curly instead of straight. Sometimes I catch him smiling that same two-eyed smile, and I wonder, is this really my husband? Or did something else come back with me from that red, wet place where I was born again? I've been sick every morning for weeks now. My body is changing, growing, becoming something I don't recognize. But I won't take the test. I can't confirm what I already know. Some truths are too terrible to face, and some neighbors are too deadly to ignore. The question isn't whether what I experienced was real, it's whether I'll survive long enough to warn the next family who moves in next door. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. I've received hundreds of messages from survivors with similar encounters. People who never existed but left permanent scars on reality. Comment "Survivor" if this sounds familiar. Hit subscribe for next week's most disturbing case about a family replacement. And remember, trust your instincts and never let them get too close. I'll see you in the next nightmare.